Sometimes, the tears you tried to hide were never weakness, they were blueprints. Each drop that fell carried quiet instruction, shaping the foundation beneath your next step. You didn't realize it then, but every ache was teaching you how to build. You once believed sorrow only dissolved things that it washed away, meaning stability, self. But now you see it sketches direction. When you finally stopped resisting the flood, you discovered design inside it. Pain wasn't destroying you, it was constructing the unseen structure of your resilience. Tears are honest architects. They know where the cracks are. They travel exactly where healing is required. You tried to silence them, thinking strength meant staying dry, but dryness never grew anything. Moisture softens the soil. Emotion prepares the ground. You were never drowning, you were softening into shape. The first stage of transformation is rarely visible. It hides beneath ordinary days, the quiet breakfasts, the tired walks, the silent drives home. There, within monotony, your spirit begins its rebuilding. No fireworks, no announcement, just a steady hum of endurance becoming structure. At night, you sit with the weight of all you couldn't fix. Yet beneath that stillness, something aligns. The heart rethreads itself through patience. It begins to understand that survival isn't the end of the story, it's the starting blueprint for creation. You start recognizing how every past ache holds instruction, the heartbreak that taught you limits, the disappointment that introduced truth, the silence that carved space for your own voice. Each one left behind material, not debris, but detail. The bridge between who you were and who you are becoming isn't built from success, it's built from understanding. Understanding that pain had purpose, that being broken open allowed light to move through. That compassion for yourself was never weakness, it was the architecture of peace. As you move forward, you begin to notice small signs of construction, a steadier breath, a softer reaction, a willingness to pause instead of perform. These are not coincidences, they are the early pillars rising from the blueprint your tears drew. You no longer rush your rebuilding, you let each day lay its brick, patient and deliberate. Some mornings bring clarity, others confusion, but both contribute to the structure. Even uncertainty serves, it teaches flexibility. Every emotion that once felt inconvenient now reveals itself as essential material. There's a quiet dignity in this kind of creation. You're not building for display, you're building for endurance. The bridge doesn't demand attention, it simply connects. It carries you from memory to possibility, from ache to awareness. Every step across it is a silent celebration of continuation. And one day, without ceremony, you find yourself standing on the other side, not fixed but formed, not healed but harmonized. You look back and see that the pain that once bent you actually aligned you. The moments that felt like endings were blueprints in disguise. Now, as you move, you carry no shame for the softness that saved you. You understand that tears were never evidence of defeat, they were the ink of reconstruction. They wrote your foundation, line by trembling line, until strength became instinct. So when the world asks how you built your bridge, you'll smile quietly. Because you know the truth. It wasn't built from triumph or perfection, but from every tender moment you allowed yourself to feel. That's how you learned to cross, by trusting what fell to teach you how to rise. There is a point where pain stops being a wound and becomes instruction. You no longer ask, why did this happen? Instead, you start asking, what did it shape? That's when everything changes. Because pain, when faced with awareness, stops burning and starts building. Most people try. To outrun it, they want healing without honesty, comfort without confrontation. But you've learned that the only way through pain is through presence. You stopped patching it with distractions. You began listening to it like a teacher with truth to tell. And in that still observation, you discovered something extraordinary. Pain has precision. It chisels only what's false. Every hardship, Every ache, every ending, they weren't random. They were architects of your interior world, removing illusions layer by layer. What fell apart wasn't punishment, it was redesign. You were never being broken down, you were being opened wide enough to rebuild correctly. Pain, you learned, has rhythm. It visits, stays, rearranges. It strips away noise so the real structure can be heard beneath. Each hurt, each disappointment, each lonely night was measuring the depth of your foundation. How much could you carry? How much could you learn to release? It didn't destroy you, it defined your framework. At first, you hated that structure. You wanted the comfort of smooth surfaces, not the labor of reconstruction. But time revealed the truth. Strength built in stillness lasts longer than ease born in avoidance. Every ache had geometry, every scar had purpose. You started seeing your emotional architecture like sacred design, not flawless, but intentional. When you began paying attention, you noticed how pain organizes chaos. It forces clarity. It shows you who stands beside you when there's nothing left to offer but silence. It shows you what truly matters when everything unnecessary burns away. Pain doesn't just teach you about endurance. It teaches you about authenticity. It makes you real again. You learn to stop labeling every loss as a lesson. Some things weren't meant to teach, only to transform. Pain doesn't always speak in wisdom. Sometimes it hums in awareness. Its power lies not in meaning, but in movement, the way it changes your internal gravity. Suddenly, things that used to weigh you down begin to lose pull. That's not escape, that's evolution. You start noticing something miraculous. The parts of you that once ached the most now hold the most strength. The places that fractured under pressure are where the light enters naturally. Your edges have softened, but your structure has strengthened. You are not fragile because of what you felt. You're fortified by it. Pain became your blueprint for discernment. It taught you what alignment feels like and what dishonesty sounds like inside your bones. It whispered boundaries before you knew how to speak them. It gave you eyes that see beyond performance and hearts that sense sincerity before words arrive. This is how awareness is born, not through perfection, but through endurance. And still, there's tenderness in this strength. You no longer need to pretend that pain didn't visit you. You honor it the way an artist honors the brush that made the first stroke. You realize that acknowledging pain doesn't glorify it, it integrates it. It says, "You shaped me, but you don't own me." That balance is liberation. You are learning to hold contradiction gracefully, to be gentle without being naive, to be strong without being hard. Pain gave you depth, not bitterness. It taught you to listen before reacting, to pause before concluding, to breathe before collapsing. It turned impatience into wisdom. Now, when discomfort returns, you no longer resist. You trace its outline, ask what it's refining this time. You trust that every ache has architecture, invisible but exact. Even in moments that feel hollow, something is forming inside you quietly, steadily. That's not suffering, that's sculpting. Because that's what pain does. It doesn't arrive to destroy. It arrives to rebuild your capacity for truth, to teach you that strength isn't the absence of ache, but the ability to stay open through it. You are no longer running from your hurt. You are redesigning your home around it. Walls stronger, windows clearer, foundation unshakable. And when you finally stand inside that rebuilt space, you'll whisper to yourself, "This pain did not ruin me, it raised me." Because every moment that once felt unbearable has now become the architecture that holds you steady. The design may have been born from ache, but it stands in grace. There's a rare kind of strength that never shouts. It doesn't need applause, permission, or proof. It's the strength of someone who decides, "I choose myself," even when no one claps for it. That choice isn't loud, it's luminous. You once waited for recognition, believing that being seen would make you valid. You tried earning belonging through perfection, approval, effort that exhausted your pulse. But the more you reached, the further peace slipped away. Until one day, you understood. No one can crown you with what you already own. Self-choice begins quietly. It happens the moment you stop auditioning for acceptance. You begin to measure worth not by reaction, but by resonance, how true you feel inside your own skin. You stop performing niceness and start practicing honesty. You discover that alignment feels better than applause. At first, this new loyalty to yourself feels foreign. Old habits whisper that it's selfish. The world mistakes self-trust for arrogance, but you keep standing taller, realizing that humility was never about shrinking, it was about accuracy. Choosing yourself doesn't make you above others, it places you beside your truth. This is the quiet crown, no medal, no jewels, only awareness. It rests not on your head, but in your decisions. Every time you honor your intuition instead of expectation, the crown steadies. Every boundary you hold without guilt adds another shine. And soon, your posture changes not out of pride, but out of peace. You notice the world responding differently. Some people pull away, confused by your calm. They were comfortable with the version of you that always agreed, always rescued, but you no longer bend to maintain harmony that hurts. You let departures happen without defense, because your energy deserves direction, not depletion. This doesn't mean you stop caring, it means you start caring accurately. You invest in what reciprocates. You speak when your words can build, not when silence would heal better. That discipline of attention becomes sacred. You're no longer available to every noise. You're devoted to your own clarity. Self-choice transforms how you move. You start walking through decisions with intention instead of apology. Opportunities that once felt urgent now meet your discernment. You learn that saying no is an act of devotion to your yes. The crown teaches selectivity. Not everything that shines deserves your step. And something remarkable happens. Peace stops being fragile. It no longer depends on outcomes or opinions. You could lose things, people, positions, and still remain centered because your stability no longer lives outside of you. It lives in the promise you made to honor what feels genuine, even if no one understands it. In that steadiness, joy changes texture. It becomes quiet, sustainable, self-generated. You begin to celebrate yourself without comparison. You recognize progress in subtle gestures, patience where anger used to live, clarity where confusion once ruled. You don't chase transformation anymore, you embody it. The quiet crown doesn't demand attention. It glows in your daily choices. How gently you speak to yourself, how bravely you protect your boundaries, how gracefully you let things unfold. It's invisible to many, but unmistakable in presence. People feel it when you walk into a space, an energy that says, I belong to myself, and that's enough. And yet, there's tenderness in that sovereignty. You don't close yourself off. You open wisely. You welcome connection that mirrors your growth, not your wounds. You attract peace because you've become its source. The crown doesn't separate you, it harmonizes you with what's real. You look back and realize, the moment you chose yourself, the world didn't shrink, it expanded. Everything you lost was never aligned. Everything that remained is rooted. You stopped searching for a throne and built a foundation instead. Now every breath you take feels like declaration, not defense. That's the silent triumph when you no longer wait to be chosen, because you already are. You wear your crown in the unseen, and it fits not by entitlement, but by evolution. The crown isn't reward, it's recognition. It's the quiet proof that you have finally returned to yourself, steady, certain, sovereign. Detachment is not disappearance. It's the art of remaining present without being pulled apart. It doesn't demand coldness, it asks for clarity. It's the skill of loving without losing shape, of giving without vanishing inside the giving. There was a time you mistook connection for control. You thought loyalty meant carrying everything, their moods, their storms, their silence. You made yourself responsible for emotions that were never yours to repair. And in that quiet exhaustion, you began to fade. but life has a way of teaching balance through burnout. You learned that care without boundaries becomes captivity. So you began studying detachment not as distance, but as design. It is architecture for peace, invisible, intentional, essential. It allows compassion to exist without chaos, generosity to flow without depletion. You no longer stretch yourself thin to be understood. You realize that true connection doesn't require constant proof. It requires presence that breathes. At first, detachment feels unnatural. Your instinct fights it, mistaking calm for indifference, silence for dismissal. But slowly, you notice how freeing it is to stop chasing every percent misunderstanding. You begin to trust that what's meant to align will meet you halfway. You start listening more, reacting less, and suddenly the world's noise begins to lose its grip. Detachment teaches you to hold what you love with open palms, to let life flow through instead of clutching every outcome. You stop confusing intensity with importance. You understand that peace isn't found in control, it's found in acceptance. And in that acceptance, you grow lighter not in care, but in burden. People who once depended on your overextension might not recognize this version of you. They may call it withdrawal, mistake your calm for absence. But what you're really doing is reclaiming your energy from spaces that kept you spinning. You've learned that love doesn't always mean staying, sometimes it means stepping back with grace. And that choice doesn't make you cold, it makes you conscious. Every time you choose still alignment over chaotic approval, you reinforce your foundation. Each pause becomes an act of self-respect. Each breath becomes a reminder that not every emotion deserves a reaction. You start to see life not as a battlefield, but as a garden. Some things bloom when left untouched. Detachment becomes your sunlight, gentle, constant, necessary. You begin observing without absorbing. You witness others' chaos without letting it rewrite your peace. You learn that empathy has limits and kindness has structure. You can offer support without surrendering stability. And in that mastery, your compassion becomes sharper, no longer fueled by guilt, but guided by wisdom. Detachment redefines how you communicate. You stop explaining your worth to those who don't listen with intent. You stop chasing closure where silence already said enough. You start speaking only where your voice has purpose. You realize that protecting your energy isn't arrogance, it's artistry. Now, every decision feels cleaner. You give when it feels nourishing, not out of obligation. You stay where growth feels mutual, not where comfort masks decay. You forgive quietly, not to reconcile, but to release the grip of resentment. Forgiveness, you've learned, is the highest form of detachment. It frees you without erasing your truth. There's beauty in this new restraint. You don't rush to fill silence or defend your softness. You let things unfold in their own time, confident that alignment never demands urgency. You start valuing peace more than being right, and that subtle shift is liberation disguised as calm. Detachment doesn't close your heart. It refines its direction. It teaches you to love deeply without drowning, to care fiercely without collapsing. It lets you move through the world like flowing water, flexible, deliberate, unforced. You no longer cling, you allow. And in that allowance, you discover the truest form of freedom, emotional independence. So now, when you give, it's clean. When you walk away, it's complete. When you stay, it's by choice, not fear. Detachment has turned your heart into an instrument of balance, able to feel deeply without falling apart, able to love wholly without losing self. That's the design. Not escape, but elevation. Not indifference, but intelligence. You're not withdrawing from life, you're mastering how to remain in it without being consumed. And that is where peace stops being temporary and becomes your natural state of being. Detachment is not disappearance. It's the art of remaining present without being pulled apart. It doesn't demand coldness. It asks for clarity. It's the skill of loving without losing shape, of giving without vanishing inside the giving. There was a time you mistook connection for control. You thought loyalty meant carrying everything, their moods, their storms, their silence. You made yourself responsible for emotions that were never yours to repair. And in that quiet exhaustion, you began to fade. But life has a way of teaching balance through burnout. You learned that care without boundaries becomes captivity. So, you began studying detachment not as distance, but as design. It is architecture for peace, invisible, intentional, essential. It allows compassion to exist without chaos, generosity to flow without depletion. You no longer stretch yourself thin to be understood. You realize that true connection doesn't require constant proof. It requires presence that breathes. At first, detachment feels unnatural. Your instinct fights it, mistaking calm for indifference, silence for dismissal. But slowly, you notice how freeing it is to stop chasing every misunderstanding. You begin to trust that what's meant to align will meet you halfway. You start listening more, reacting less, and suddenly the world's noise begins to lose its grip. Detachment teaches you to hold what you love with open palms, to let life flow through instead of clutching every outcome. You stop confusing intensity with importance. You understand that peace isn't found in control, it's found in acceptance. And in that acceptance, you grow lighter, not in care, but in burden. People who once depended on your overextension might not recognize this version of you. They may call it withdrawal, mistake your calm for absence. But what you're really doing is reclaiming your energy from spaces that kept you spinning. You've learned that love doesn't always mean staying. Sometimes it means stepping back with grace. And that choice doesn't make you cold, it makes you conscious. Every time you choose still alignment over chaotic approval, you reinforce your foundation. Each pause becomes an act of self-respect. Each breath becomes a reminder that not every emotion deserves a reaction. You start to see life not as a battlefield, but as a garden. Some things bloom when left untouched. Detachment becomes your sunlight, gentle, constant, necessary. You begin observing without absorbing. You witness others' chaos without letting it rewrite your peace. You learn that empathy has limits and kindness has structure. You can offer support without surrendering stability. And in that mastery, your compassion becomes sharper, no longer fueled by guilt, but guided by wisdom. Detachment redefines how you communicate. You stop explaining your worth to those who don't listen with intent. You stop chasing closure where silence already said enough. You start speaking only where your voice has purpose. You realize that protecting your energy isn't arrogance, it's artistry. Now, every decision feels cleaner. You give when it feels nourishing, not out of obligation. You stay where growth feels mutual, not where comfort masks decay. You forgive quietly, not to reconcile, but to release the grip of resentment. Forgiveness, you've learned, is the highest form of detachment. It frees you without erasing your truth. There's beauty in this new restraint. You don't rush to fill silence or defend your softness. You let things unfold in their own time, confident that alignment never demands urgency. You start valuing peace more than being right. And that subtle shift is liberation disguised as calm. Detachment doesn't close your heart, it refines its direction. It teaches you to love deeply without drowning, to care fiercely without collapsing. It lets you move through the world like flowing water, flexible, deliberate, unforced. You no longer cling, you allow. And in that allowance, you discover the truest form of freedom, emotional independence. So now when you give, it's clean. When you walk away, it's complete. When you stay, it's by choice, not fear. Detachment has turned your heart into an instrument of balance, able to feel deeply without falling apart, able to love wholly without losing self. That's the design, not escape but elevation, not indifference but intelligence. You're not withdrawing. From life, you're mastering how to remain in it without being consumed. And that is where peace stops being temporary and becomes your natural state of being. There's a kind of growth that doesn't announce itself. It happens in the quiet hours when your voice trembles, when your eyes blur, when your heart still beats under the weight of what it just lost. Every drop that fell from your eyes wasn't waste, it was work. Each tear carried a story, a confession, a lesson, a letting go. And while you thought the world wasn't watching, something sacred was being built inside you patiently, silently, beautifully. You didn't know that pain was planting something. You thought it was ending you. But grief was a gardener all along, teaching your roots to find water even in drought. It softened you just enough for light to enter. It humbled you, shaped you, stretched you in ways strength never could. And now, as the dust begins to settle, you notice small blooms within understanding, compassion, stillness. They don't need applause. They exist as quiet evidence that you survived in a way that changed your nature. You start to see that healing isn't a straight path. It's a spiral returning to familiar pain but meeting it with new wisdom. You no longer run from what hurt you. You sit beside it, listen, and let it finish its sentence. That's maturity, when you stop demanding closure and start creating peace instead. The ache that once owned you has become a teacher whispering, "You know how to stand now." The tears that once embarrassed you have turned to symbols of your courage. They taught you to breathe through discomfort instead of fighting it. They prove that feeling deeply is not fragility, it's depth. Because only those who allow the storm to move through them ever learn how to rebuild with truth. And that's exactly what you've done. You've rebuilt yourself from something raw and real, not from denial, not from pretense, but from honesty. Now, when you speak, there's a calm strength behind your words. When you look at the world, there's understanding instead of urgency. You stopped trying to fix everything that broke and instead began nurturing what could grow. And that shift from control to care is the foundation of grace. You no longer chase joy like it's running away from you. You let it return naturally in its own rhythm, like sunlight finding an open window. You've learned that some of the most powerful transformations aren't loud, they're tender. They happen when you choose softness even after life tried to make you hard, when you forgive without needing the other person to know. When you carry your past not as a wound, but as wisdom folded carefully into your steps. That's what real strength looks like, not the absence of emotion, but the courage to feel and continue anyway. And perhaps the most beautiful part? You now understand that healing doesn't erase history, it redefines it. The moments that once felt like endings have become beginnings in disguise. The same memories that once made you ache now make you grateful for your resilience. You stop wishing for a different story because you finally see the masterpiece that was forming through every broken chapter. So yes, your tears built something. Not a monument to sorrow, but a sanctuary of self-awareness. They turned pain into nourishment, doubt into depth, fear into gentleness. And even now, as life continues to unfold, those tears remain part of your design, not as reminders of what you lost, but as proof of what you became. When someone looks at you and says, "You've changed," they'll never know the seasons that bloomed behind your silence. They won't understand how many nights it took to turn pain into perspective. But you'll know, because every bloom inside you still carries the memory of rain. And that's the quiet miracle of growth. What once made you ache is now what makes you alive. The beauty of healing is that it never asks for applause. It shows itself in the smallest moments, when you breathe easier, when the world stops feeling like something to prove, when you catch yourself smiling without remembering why. That's growth in disguise, the quiet evidence that what once tore you apart has turned into strength that carries you. You begin to notice it in your pace. You move through life without the heavy armor of defense. You no longer walk with fear disguised as readiness. You simply exist, unguarded yet grounded. This is what real transformation looks like, not the absence of struggle, but the presence of balance. It's the calm knowing that you no longer need to explain how you got here. You simply belong here. Inside, something has shifted. Where pain once echoed, there's a steady rhythm, a soft pulse of acceptance. You have become both the soil and the seed, nurturing yourself with every patient step forward. You feed on honesty, on clarity, on moments that ask nothing but presence. And every act of stillness is proof that peace no longer feels foreign. It feels like home. You find grace in ordinary scenes, morning light touching a wall, the hum of quiet streets, the way wind passes without resistance. These aren't random details anymore. They're reminders that life never stopped being beautiful. You just needed to slow down enough to see it again. That's what healing does. It restores sight where despair once built walls. It teaches you that joy isn't something you chase. It's something that grows where attention rests. The world may look the same, but your vision isn't. You don't crave intensity, you crave harmony. You've learned that peace is not passive, it's a deliberate posture. It's the art of standing tall without raising your voice. It's learning to forgive not because they deserve it, but because you do. Forgiveness, after all, is freedom disguised as gentleness. And gentleness, the kind that doesn't need validation, is the loudest form of power you'll ever hold. Each day, you choose softness without losing edge. You set boundaries like invisible rivers guiding, not punishing. You understand that not everything broken needs fixing. Some things only need releasing. That's wisdom, knowing when to tend and when to turn away. Your patience deepens, your voice steadies, and in that steadiness, there's dignity. You've stopped rushing to arrive anywhere. Arrival, you realize, was never a place, it was a state of being. You start creating differently now, from love, not from lack, from gratitude, not from guilt, from choice, not from fear. Even silence has texture now. It's no longer the pause between chaos. It's a canvas where meaning breathes. What once felt like emptiness has become expansion space for all that you are becoming. The people who meet you now may not understand the weight you once carried. They'll see calm where there was once fire, ease where there was once resistance, and that's okay. They weren't meant to witness the rebuilding. They were meant to meet the result. Because healing is never a performance, it's a personal architecture, shaped quietly behind closed doors, revealed only through the way you now walk through open ones. You don't call it recovery anymore. You call it remembering your rhythm, your worth, your design. You move with intention not to control, but to connect. Every step is a conversation between who you were and who you've become. And in that conversation, there's no argument left, only understanding. When you sit with yourself now, there's no judgment. Just recognition that every scar served a sentence, every ache carried instruction. The pain that once hollowed you out has become space for empathy to live. That's the paradox of healing. You lose pieces only to discover what truly fits. And perhaps this is what it means to live what you grew, to carry light without announcing it, to love without needing reward, to exist without the old noise, to wake up and know that peace has become your natural language. You've stopped surviving your story. You're now writing it slowly, softly, but entirely your own. There is a moment when the ground beneath your feet feels softer, not because the world softened, but because you carried something different into it. You touch the rail of the path you built, and you recognize its lines, its gentle curve, its journey. Every time you stepped forward with trembling, every time you paused in dread, you were tracing this path before you even knew it had an end. Your tears didn't vanish. They became sediment beneath your feet, rich, silent, life-making. You thought each drop was failure, but they were seeds of arrival. And now you stand where you once longed to be, on the other side of fear, not as someone healed, but as someone whose heart learned to hold what happened. When you look behind you, the darkness still lingers, but it's distant. It's part of the landscape now, not the storm cloud overhead. You feel it's safe to step without turning, safe to breathe without quitting, safe to be seen without shrinking again. Your scars aren't hidden, they are markers of passage. They say, I was here, I moved anyway. The wind picks up and brushes your hair. You do not flinch, you do not step back. Because now you sense the wind is no longer trying to push you, it's greeting you. It carries no warning. It whispers that even after all the running, you arrive by staying, by being soft when the world demanded hard, by being honest when the world taught silence. You loved too hard, you lost too much, and in that tragedy, you found a power not of triumph, but of endurance. A power that doesn't look like fireworks, it looks like a steady flame in a long night. You became that flame. You burned without destroying. You glowed not to prove, but to remind. There's someone in the crowd watching you now, and you catch their eyes. They expected someone unbeaten, someone unscarred. Instead, they see you bearing both break and build. They might not say it, but you know you are evidence for them. Evidence that heartbreak can lead to home. Sorrow can lead to strength. Shame can lead to sanctuary. You step forward, and the path resonates with your pace. You carry kindness like a flag, not because you owe it to anyone, but because you owe it to yourself. Because you once walked with doubt in your step, and now you walk with conviction in your breath. Here is your truth. You didn't escape your story. You became its author. You didn't outrun your pain. You reused it. You didn't wait to be discovered. You revealed yourself. And now, as you cross the final span, not of the bridge you built, but of the one you became, you feel the world shift. You're not an echo anymore. You are the origin. Your tears built the route. They became your way. Your steps finished not because they came to a stop, but because they found rhythm. They found you. Walk on. Let the ground hum beneath your feet. Let the breeze carry your rest. Because you didn't just arrive, you emerged. You are the end of the search, and the beginning of this life you never owed anyone to explain.